Right before 8 o'clock in the morning of December 7th, 1941, hundreds of Japanese fighter planes attacked an American naval base at Pearl Harbor, near Honolulu, Hawaii. It lasted only about 2 hours, but the results were devastating. The Japanese managed to destroy nearly 20 American naval vessels, including 8 enormous battleships, and almost 200 airplanes. More than 2,000 American soldiers and sailors died in the attack, and another 1,000 were wounded. The day after the assault, President Franklin D. Roosevelt asked Congress to declare war on Japan. Congress approved his declaration with just one dissenting vote. 3 days later, Japanese allies Germany and Italy also declared war on the United States, and again Congress reciprocated. More than 2 years into conflict, America had finally joined World War II. The attack on Pearl Harbor was a surprise to everyone, but Japan and the United States had been edging towards war for decades. The United States was particularly unhappy with Japan's increasingly attitude toward China. The Japanese government believed that the only way to solve its economic and demographic problems was to expand it into its neighbor's territory and take over its export market. In the end, Japan had declared war on China in 1937. American officials responded to this aggression with a battery of economic sanctions and trade embargoes. They responded that without access to money and goods, and especially essential supplies like oil, Japan would have to rein its expansionism. Instead, the sanctions made the Japanese more determined to stand their ground. During months of negotiations between Tokyo and Washington, D.C., neither side would budge. It seemed that the war was going to be inevitable. But no one believed that the Japanese would start the war with an attack on American territory. For one thing, it would be terribly inconvenient. Hawaii and Japan were about 4,000 miles apart from another. American intelligence officials were confident that any Japanese attack would take place in one of the relatively nearby European colonies in the South Pacific, the Dutch East Indies, for instance, or Singapore or Indonesia. Because American military leaders were not expecting an attack so close to home, the naval facilities at Pearl Harbor were relatively undefended. Almost the entire Pacific Fleet was moored around Ford Island in the harbor, and hundreds of airplanes were squeezed into adjacent airfields. To the Japanese, Pearl Harbor was an irresistible target. The Japanese plan was simple: destroy the Pacific Fleet. That way the Americans would not be able to fight back. As Japan's armed forces spread across the South Pacific on December 7th, after months of planning and practice, the Japanese launched their attack. Right before 8 a.m., Japanese planes filled the sky over Pearl Harbor. Bombs and bullets rained into the vessels moored below. At 8:10, an 1,800-pound bomb smashed through the deck of the battleship USS Arizona and landed in the forward ammunition magazine. The ship exploded and sank with more than 1,000 men trapped inside. Next, torpedoes pierced the shell of the battleship USS Oklahoma, with 400 sailors aboard. The Oklahoma lost her balance, rolled onto her side, and slipped underwater. By the time the attack was over, every battleship in Pearl Harbor, USS Arizona and USS Oklahoma, USS California, USS West Virginia, USS Utah, USS Maryland, USS Pennsylvania, USS Tennessee, and USS Nevada had sustained significant damage. In all, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor crippled or destroyed 18 American ships and nearly 300 airplanes. Dry docks and airfields were likewise destroyed. Most important, almost 2,500 men were killed, and another 1,000 were wounded. but the Japanese had failed to cripple the Pacific Fleet. By the 1940s, battleships were no longer the most important naval vessel. Aircraft carriers were, and as it happened, all the Pacific Fleet carriers were away from the base on December 7th. Moreover, the Pearl Harbor assault had left the base most vital onshore facilities, oil storage depots, repair shops, shipyards, and submarine docks intact. As a result, the USS Navy was able to rebound relatively quickly from the attack. Yesterday, President Roosevelt said on December 8th, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked. He went on to say, no matter now how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people and their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. I believe I interpret the will of the Congress and of the people when I assert that we will not only defend ourselves to the uttermost, but we will make very certain that this form of treachery shall never endanger us again. After the Pearl Harbor attack, and for the first time after years of discussion and debate, the American people were united in their determination to go to war. The Japanese had wanted to goad the United States into an agreement to lift the economic sanctions against them. Instead, they pushed their adversary into a global conflict that ultimately resulted in Japan's first occupation by foreign power. On December 8th, Congress approved Roosevelt's declaration of war. 3 days later, Japanese allies Germany and Italy declared war against the United States for a second time. Congress reciprocated. More than 2 years after the start of the conflict, the United States had entered World War II.